Before I knew how to bake a birthday cake, I knew how to read a balance sheet. My mother used to joke that I came out of the womb holding a calculator. She wasn't entirely wrong. I grew up watching her run the books for my uncle's hardware store in Sudbury, a small, cluttered office off the back hallway that smelled like sawdust and coffee. By the time I was 12, I could spot an entry error faster than she could. By 16, I was doing reconciliations on weekends. I went to Laurentian, studied accounting, and took a job at a mid-sized firm in Ottawa that specialized in estate and family law support. I was a financial analyst who worked closely with family lawyers on asset disclosure, which is a polished way of saying I spent my days finding money people didn't want found. I was good at it, really good. When I married my husband, I thought I was done with that kind of work. Not professionally, I kept my job, but emotionally. I thought I'd found someone who didn't need to be investigated, someone who told the truth. I was wrong about that. We met at a mutual friend's cottage on Georgian Bay the summer I turned 27. He was funny and confident, and he made everything look easy. He worked in commercial real estate, leasing, mostly, and he had that particular kind of charm that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. We dated for 2 years. We got married at a small venue in the Gatineau Hills in September, the leaves just starting to turn. My mother cried. His parents flew in from Calgary. My best friend gave a toast that made everyone laugh. My daughter was born 14 months later. She was early 5 weeks, and she spent 11 days in the NICU at CHU. 11 days of me sitting beside a plastic isolette, counting her breaths, learning to read monitors I had no business understanding. My husband was there mostly. He came every day, stayed a few hours, then went back to work because, as he said, someone had to keep the lights on. I didn't argue. I was too tired, too scared, too in love with this tiny creature who had already fought harder than most people do in a lifetime. When my daughter came home, I took my full parental leave. My husband went back to work full-time. We had agreed on this, or at least I thought we had agreed. Looking back, I think I agreed and he accepted, which is not the same thing. The first year was hard. The second year was harder in different ways. My daughter had some ongoing respiratory issues, common in preemies, the doctor said, usually resolves, but it meant extra appointments, a specialist at the children's hospital, a nebulizer at home, an inhaler in her daycare bag. Nothing catastrophic, just constant, low-level vigilance that never fully switched off. By the time she was 2, I had gone back to work part-time. By 2.5, full-time. My husband had been promoted. We bought a house in Kanata. A nice house, more than we probably needed, but he'd found the listing and fallen in love with it, and I was tired of the apartment. My name was on the mortgage. Both our names. That mattered later. I don't know exactly when things started to change. That's the part people always want pinpointed, and I never can. There was no single moment. It was more like water finding its way through a hairline crack. Gradual, quiet, and then suddenly the whole wall is wet. He started working late more often, started going out with clients more, started being somewhere else even when he was sitting right next to me. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was a busy season. I told myself a lot of things that were easier than the truth. The truth came on a Tuesday in March. I was at his home office. He worked from home some days, looking for a printer cable. His laptop was open. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a printer cable. But the email was right there on the screen, not minimized, not closed, just sitting there. It was from a woman whose name I didn't recognize. It was not ambiguous. I stood there for what felt like a long time. Then I closed the laptop, found the printer cable in the second drawer, went downstairs and printed what I needed to print, made my daughter's lunch, put her down for her nap. Then I sat at the kitchen table and I thought very carefully about what I knew how to do. I did not confront him that day. I know that surprises people, But I had spent years in a professional context watching people confront too early, watching them tip their hand before they had anything in it. I knew what happened when you showed your cards before you'd counted them. The other person gets time to prepare, gets time to move things, gets time to make you look unstable while they look reasonable. I was not going to do that. I called my sister that night after he'd fallen asleep. She's 5 years older than me, lives in Bari, and she's the most practical person I have ever met. I told her what I'd seen. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Okay, what do you need?" I said I needed a family lawyer. A good one. She found me one, a woman in Nepean with a reputation in Ottawa legal circles for being methodical and thorough. I'll call her my lawyer because that's what she was. I met with her on a Thursday morning, told my husband I had a client meeting, sat in a clean, quiet office and explained my situation with the detachment I'd spent years training myself to maintain. My lawyer listened without interrupting. Then she asked about assets. That's where my background became relevant. Over the next 3 weeks, I did what I do. I started quietly pulling together every financial document I could legitimately access. Joint tax returns, we filed together, so I had full access. Mortgage statements, our joint investment account, which I managed because he'd always said numbers made his eyes glaze over. Credit card statements from the cards on our joint account. The first thing I noticed was the mileage claims. My husband claimed vehicle expenses as part of his work. He drove to property viewings, client meetings, that sort of thing. His business expenses ran through a sole proprietorship he'd set up before we married. I'd always been kept somewhat at arm's length from it. He handled his own taxes separately, paid himself a salary into our joint account, and I'd never questioned it because I was busy and, honestly, because I trusted him. I pulled 3 years of our joint returns, looked at the business income he'd declared. Then I started cross-referencing with things I knew. Property listings in his area, client names that occasionally came up in conversation. The numbers were thin. Not dramatically thin, just quietly, consistently thin. The kind of thin that looks like a linear, and then another linear, and then another. But I knew what linears look like when they're real, and I knew what they look like when someone is selectively showing you the bottom of the jar while the top is somewhere else. I found the second account on a Saturday afternoon in April. I wasn't supposed to find it. It was a business checking account at a different institution, not the bank we used together. I found it because I was going through a filing cabinet looking for our daughter's birth certificate for a passport application, and tucked behind a folder of old utility bills was a statement. One statement from 8 months prior. I looked at it for a long time. The account had a balance of just over $41,000. I photographed it with my phone, put it back exactly where I found it, found the birth certificate, made dinner. I didn't sleep much that night. The following week, I met with my lawyer again. I brought everything I had, printed, organized, the way I would organize documentation for a court disclosure package. She looked through it with the expression of someone who is professionally neutral but personally impressed. Then she said carefully that what I had was a strong foundation, but that the business account was key. We needed to understand the full picture of what had moved through it. In Ontario, full financial disclosure is required in family law proceedings. Both parties have to file a Form 13, a financial statement disclosing all income, assets, debts, everything. And importantly, the court takes a very dim view of people who play games with that form. My lawyer said, let's let him file first. Let's see what he declares. I agreed. I told my husband I wanted to separate. I did it on a Sunday morning, after our daughter had gone to a birthday party at a neighbor's house. Calm, measured. I said I knew about the affair. I said I thought we were done. He didn't deny anything. He looked tired, actually, like he'd been waiting for this and was almost relieved it was happening. What came next, though, I hadn't fully anticipated. He changed, not in the way I'd hoped, not toward remorse or accountability. He changed in the way that certain people change when they realize consequences are real. He got strategic. Within a week, he'd spoken to a lawyer of his own. Within 2 weeks, he was talking about the house as though it were entirely his idea to buy it. His down payment, his credit that got us approved. He started mentioning, casually, that I'd taken a lot of time off when our daughter was born, that I'd gone back to work part-time for a while, that my income had been lower. He was building a narrative. I recognized it because I'd seen it before, in files, in affidavits, in the things people tell their lawyers when they're trying to shape how a court sees them. He did not know that I recognized it. He filed his financial statement in June. My lawyer called me after she received it. There was a particular quality to her voice, controlled but alert. She said, his declared business income for the past 3 years is significantly lower than what we'd expect based on the account statement you found. He had not declared the second account at all. That's not a paperwork error. That's not a misunderstanding of the form. That is a deliberate omission on a sworn legal document. In Ontario, that is contempt of court. It can mean penalties. It can mean an adverse inference, a judge deciding that if you're hiding something, they'll assume what you're hiding is worse than the reality. And critically, it shifts moral authority in the courtroom in a way that no amount of narrative building can fully undo. I asked my lawyer what we should do. She said we should let him proceed, gather more, and when the time was right, we'd bring it forward. The time came in September. We were scheduled for a case conference, a meeting with the judge to discuss the key issues and see if settlement was possible. My husband's lawyer arrived with a thick folder and a confident manner. My husband sat beside him looking, I thought, a little too relaxed. My lawyer brought a forensic accountant. I know, I see the irony, but she had a colleague she trusted, a woman who specialized in exactly this kind of analysis. And what she had done in the 2 months prior was reconstruct the financial activity of my husband's business account using the single statement I'd found, cross-referenced with banking records obtained through the legal discovery process. The picture that emerged was not flattering. Over 3 years, just under $200,000 had moved through the undeclared account. Some of it was legitimate business income that he'd simply routed around our joint finances. Money he had every legal right to earn, but which he'd hidden from the matrimonial asset pool. Some of it was less straightforward. There were transfers that corresponded in timing and amount to expensive trips he'd taken that I'd been told were work-related. There was a recurring monthly transfer to an address that turned out to be an apartment downtown. He had been paying rent on an apartment for over a year. My lawyer presented this in the case conference with the measured precision of someone who has done this many times. The forensic accountant spoke briefly and clearly. The judge asked several questions, primarily directed at my husband's lawyer, who had the expression of a man encountering information he had not been given by his client. My husband said nothing. He had gone very still. The case conference did not produce a settlement that day. But something shifted. The confident manner across the table was gone. In October, his lawyer contacted mine with a revised settlement proposal. It was substantially different from his original position. He was no longer claiming the house was primarily his. He was no longer disputing my share of the matrimonial assets. He agreed to full financial disclosure, real disclosure, this time properly audited, and to an equalization payment that reflected the actual value of what had accumulated during our marriage. He also agreed to a parenting arrangement that my lawyer and I had drafted, one that put our daughter's medical needs front and center. Her respiratory specialist appointments, her coverage under my provincial health benefits through work, which were better than his, a clear protocol for medical decisions. That last part mattered to me more than any dollar amount. There's something I want to say here because I thought about it a lot during those months. I was angry. I want to be honest about that. There were nights I sat on the floor of my daughter's room after she'd fallen asleep, just listening to her breathe, and I was furious at him for lying, at myself for not seeing it sooner, and the whole situation for existing. That anger was real, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the anger didn't drive the process, the clarity did. Those are different things, and I think it matters. I didn't go looking for revenge. I went looking for the truth, because the truth was what my daughter needed for a stable future, and it was what I needed to build something real after this was over. The rest of it, the account, the apartment, the paper trail, I didn't create any of that. I just found it. The divorce was finalized in February. It was a grey day, the kind Ottawa does well in winter, the light flat and cold and oddly peaceful. My lawyer called to confirm, and I sat in my car in a parking lot on Merivale Road for a few minutes before driving to pick up my daughter from daycare. She asked me on the drive home if we were going to have pasta for dinner. She is extremely focused on pasta. I said yes, and she said good because she wanted the one with the little shells, not the long kind. I told her we'd have the little shells. Some things, after everything, are still very simple. I stayed in the house. We agreed I'd buy out his share, which I refinanced for. My sister came to stay for a few weeks in the spring, and we repainted the living room a color that has no associations for me whatsoever. A sort of soft grey green that she picked and I now love. I put my daughter's drawings on the fridge with the nice magnets, the ceramic ones shaped like animals that I bought at a market in Wakefield the summer before everything fell apart. I went back to full-time work. My colleagues knew I'd been through a separation. I didn't hide it, and they were kind in the way the Canadians are kind, which is to say, quietly and without making a production of it. My manager asked once if I needed any flexibility with my schedule. I said I might occasionally. She said that was fine. I'm telling this story because I spent a long time feeling like I had done something wrong by paying attention, like the fact that I knew what to look for was somehow unfair, like I should have just been blindsided the way the story is supposed to go. But here's what I actually think. The information was always there. The account existed whether I found it or not. The apartment existed. The transfers existed. The only thing my training gave me was the ability to see clearly what was already in front of me. And I think everyone deserves that. Not just people who studied accounting. Not just people who happened to marry someone who lied in a way that left a paper trail. Everyone who finds themselves in a situation like this deserves someone in their corner who will look at the actual numbers and say, wait, something doesn't add up here. Something didn't add up. I found out what it was. And my daughter had the little shell pasta that night, and she ate almost all of it, and she fell asleep in about 4 minutes flat, and I sat in the quiet house that was mine now, really mine, and I thought, okay, this is what the other side looks like. It looked like enough. I think about that Tuesday in March a lot, not the email. I made peace with that. I think about the 20 minutes after when I closed the laptop and went looking for the printer cable anyway. When I made my daughter's lunch and put her down for her nap and sat at the kitchen table and chose, very deliberately, not to fall apart. That choice didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of learning that clarity is more useful than reaction. And I've been sitting with that ever since, because I think it's the thing nobody tells you when your life is coming undone. That how you respond in the quiet moments, when no one is watching and nothing is required of you yet, is the thing that determines everything that follows. My husband made his choices too. I've thought about that. He chose to open a second account and not tell me. He chose to sign a financial statement and leave it off. He chose, for over a year, to pay rent on an apartment and come home to our daughter and act like nothing was different. Each of those choices compounded. Not because I was waiting to catch him. I wasn't, not at first, but because that's simply how it works. The thing you hide doesn't disappear. It accumulates, and eventually the weight of it shows up somewhere, in a number that doesn't reconcile, in a statement tucked behind old utility bills, in a lawyer's face going carefully neutral across a conference table. I didn't set a trap, I just knew how to read what was already there. And I think that's the part I want to sit with, because it's the part that actually helped me. Not the anger. The anger was real, but it didn't file the documents. Not the hurt. The hurt was real, but it didn't protect my daughter's medical coverage. What helped was knowing my own mind well enough to stay steady when everything was pulling me toward chaos. Knowing that I could hold two things at once, the grief of a marriage ending and the clear-eyed focus of someone who still had a job to do. My sister asked me once, a few months after the divorce was finalized, if I felt like I'd won. I had to think about that for longer than she expected. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd held on to something, to my daughter, to the house we'd made into a home, to a version of myself that didn't disappear under pressure. I felt like I'd been honest, even when dishonesty would have been easier. I felt like I'd done the work, even on the days when the work was sitting at a kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, cross-referencing tax returns while my daughter slept upstairs. That's not winning, that's just integrity. The unglamorous, non-cinematic kind that doesn't make for a dramatic moment but adds up to something you can actually live with. My daughter still asks for the little shell pasta. She's extremely consistent about this, and every time I make it, I think, this is what I stayed steady for. This ordinary, beautiful, completely mundane Tuesday evening. This is enough. It always was,